All right, so the next section I'm going to have a kind of discussion. So we have 4 group speakers who also have a lot of experience running, building distributed teams, and their company have a very significant part of their entire organization distributed, and some are 100% distributed. So it's going to be really fun and interesting to hear their thoughts and learnings. So our first speaker is Dave Ken. He's a VP of engineering at Mozilla, running the entire Firefox and engineering organization. And Dave came here from Portland just to give us a talk. So thank you. And I guess you will continue that applause because Dana, she is a VP of engineering at Envision, which is a very well-known company that have 100% distributed. And Dana, it's also come from Portland for And then we have Wade. So Wade is a co-founder and the CEO at Zapier, and Zapier is also 100% distributed. So we're excited to have you to come here to share the learnings. And lastly, before I introduce our speaker, I mentioned that so our original speaker for this slot is Jocelyn, but I guess you got my email, so she unfortunately felt really bad this morning. I feel really well, so she wasn't able to make it today to this event. So, but fortunately, we have Tim. Tim is a VP of engineering at CTO at Iconics, and he has a lot of experience running building digital team as well. So let's welcome our panelists and moderators. So let's get started.
Howdy, y'all. Thanks for showing up. I will pass the mic until we get mics, because we're agile engineers. We can do this, y'all. Look, we have the magic man had mics. Thanks, man. So thanks for coming out. We have a pretty diverse group of leaders and how they operate with their teams. So I want to take a moment just so you can get a little mind framing of what our composition is for our different businesses, so that can hopefully spur some good questions on how we do this. Since I'm talking, I'll just go first. So like Jerry said, I'm at Envision, and we are 100% remote. Our entire company is distributed. We have no offices at all. That includes our CEO. He works from home, so it's a pretty unique challenge. Right now we have 650 plus employees with our company, so it's pretty interesting, which I use as a code word for weird, to live in that environment. But previous to that, I was at New Relic, which y'all are probably familiar with, it's here, and we had distributed remote groups as well, and so slightly different challenge, but that's how Envision's composed. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, so Mozilla is strangely distributed. We have about 1,200 folks. The engineering team is about 450. The Firefox engineering team is about 450, spread across 6 offices, 14 countries, and most time zones.
Tim, can you tell us a little bit about what you got going on?
Yeah, so we've got about 1,000 people split across 40 offices in basically most major countries. I look after about 250 odd folks in product development across every time zone in 10 to 12 countries, some of which are in big offices, tiny offices, or
Wait, tell us about Zapier. You're 100% remote as well, right?
Yeah, we're also 100% remote. There's 160 of us, 50 in engineering. 2/3 are in the US, a third international. I don't know that we're in most time zones, but we're in many time zones. We've been at this for 6 years or so now.
Wow, that's a long time. So yeah, I forgot to mention, at Envision, we have people on every continent, with the exception of Antarctica. So if you know any engineer or scientist, like hook them up, I'll probably pay them, just so I can have the glory of saying every continent. So let's just jump in there, guys. You know, I've been doing this now for about 2 years, this 100% remote lifestyle. Like I said previously, you know, I've had the kind of situation that Tim and Dave have. You know, what are some of the things that you do to help stay aligned and connected on your business objectives, to help feed that information out? Who wants to take a stab at that kind of stuff? Anybody? All right, let's hear it.
So we do a few things. You know, we've got a pretty strong cadence of communications. So I blog really regularly. I do weekly updates to the whole org and the whole team generally. Do strategy papers on a quarterly basis. I'll get people together. One of the things, actually, Chris was mentioning before, you know, if you go remote, you've got to have budget to get people together face to face, because you still need people to be there in person. So, you know, we do semi-annual get-togethers. We get people together fairly regularly. Sometimes it might be half the world in one place, the other half in another place, and make sure we just keep talking. Lots of video chat, you know, that kind of stuff.
Are y'all Slack junkies too?
A little too much.
Slack junkies. What about you, Wade, being 100% distributed? How do you keep your team aligned on what your objectives are and take out some of that nebulous thinking? What do y'all do?
Yeah, I think the key is you have to repeat yourself almost ad nauseum. You have to get to a point where, you know, it feels like you can't say it one more time. But the tricky part is you have to find creative ways to repeat it in different types of mediums, so folks who learn differently can pick up on, like, hey, this is the core objectives and things like that. So for example, you know, I have an internal tool that we call async, and at the very top, and in the top of that is like our key metrics that we're working on. In Slack and various channels, we have bots that are always pumping in the metrics, whether it's daily or weekly. At the beginning of weekly staff meetings or all hands, we're talking about it. We're writing updates into async in different ways. So it's all these different methods that we're kind of just finding ways to tell the same story over and over, but it doesn't feel as repetitive because you're kind of changing the medium up and you're mixing it up in different ways. So you have a better chance at resonating with different folks who kind of come from different backgrounds and different approaches.
And I think that's like a key characteristic of having, whether it be satellite offices or just remote engineers. And even in office, it's that ability to repeat. Because you have to take, especially in an environment where you're global, like all of us here have global teams, is people are English second language. People have different mechanisms for learning. Some, you know, our email, they only read their email, they don't read their Slack. Some read their Slack, some don't read their email. Some expect you to text them. And so I'm curious, Dave, you've been at Mozilla for a while, so how are some of the ways that you keep your team together too?
Yeah, so one major one is every twice a year we all get together, which is, I apologize for anyone next week that has to run into Mozilla folks. It can be rough. We do that. We have weekly all hands, like the whole project. So both all of our company and our open source project have weekly voice calls with the leadership to talk through what's important. Every team has just team check-ins. We try and do them daily if we can, if the time zones allow. It's really important to build some camaraderie there, and the managers of the team can cascade messages there. Slack every minute of every day. Slack and IRC, because we like to keep things complicated.
Old school, I like it.
Email lists, mailing lists. Most mediums that exist, we've tried them, and many of them work.
Trial and error, people. Don't forget to experiment. So I'm gonna ask a question that's general, and we'll let y'all jump in. So when did you decide to open up, you know, distributed teams or being, you know, like myself and Wade 100%? What was it, that forcing factor that said, we're gonna try this out and see if it's successful? What do you think, Tim?
I think for us it was personal circumstances of key individuals on teams, right? There's always one or two people you absolutely cannot afford to lose. We get older, we have families, like we all know the Bay Area gets more expensive, people want to leave, but they want to keep their jobs. So we actually had some folks initially start to move away, been working with for quite some time. And through that, we learned how to work together effectively. So it's that kind of, you know, example or initial example of how to work remotely. That worked really effectively. We built some practices on top of it, started to roll it out across the globe. And then organizationally, we've actually built up a lot of our team through acquisition as well. So we've purchase companies and that kind of thing. And as a result of that, naturally, there's a dev team. You find a way to integrate them. You find a way to talk together, talk to each other, and you roll out some consistency as well.
So wait, you being a founder and all, like, what was your, how did you make that decision? Like, I am going to have a remote team and it's going to work. How did you convince people and get buy-in from your stakeholders that you could make this successful experiment reality?
Sure. For us, it was also a bit personal circumstance. We started the company as a side project. Side projects don't have offices. You don't co-locate. We got used to working with pull requests and over chat and things like that. And then kind of as we got further in, we went through YC in 2012, but at the tail end of that, Mike, one of my co-founders, moved back to Missouri to be with his then girlfriend, now wife. She was going through law school, and again, you don't, key member of the team, you don't break up the band because someone moves across the country. And then at that time, we were also relatively inexperienced when it came to hiring. This is my first company where we've scaled to this amount. And so the common advice you hear is like, well, just hire past colleagues. And so, I had colleagues that we'd worked with that we were comfortable with and built that rapport. One was in Chicago, another was in Missouri. And so that's kind of what set us down this path. And then we got used to working that way and realized kind of some of the key benefits, leaned into those. We also ran into some of the common pitfalls. And we're just very, kind of just try to be disciplined about, and upfront about the challenges and work to minimize those, but then lean into the things that work really well for remote.
So Wade didn't hire randos, he hired friends. That was step one for him.
Yeah, at first. You have to expand out.
That's a good nugget. All right, so remember, when you try this, hire your friends. So, Dave, what's one of the anti-patterns, being with Mozilla so long, that you've seen having a distributed company that's still just something that you're constantly tweaking and trying to move past?
I think Jason mentioned something that's just being a jerk because it's text is a really big one. We do have to pull people, get people, I did it this morning. Like, it never ends, right? That's the biggest one. Similarly, rumor mills, ain't nothing like a remote worker rumor mill. It's because you will never see it. You'll never see it until it's way too late. So we spend a lot of time. It's another reason you have to get really well aligned, make sure people hear as much information as you can, because they will invent the rest. I think that's true anywhere, but it's insidious in a remote culture where you don't have the chance to tamp it down if you're not really deliberate about it.
Oh yeah, I think Jason was hitting on this earlier, but it's about assuming the best. I think when you're remote, you really have to put your ego down. You have to really go in it without the stress of the day or the stress of the moment and assume the best, because it's really easy for your reflections and emotions when you read a text and there's maybe multiple exclamation points, and that could be, dang it, they're yelling at me, or this is so awesome, I can't believe it. And I have a tendency to be a glass half full person, so I'm always assuming the best, probably to disadvantage sometimes. You're like, wow, that's awesome. They're like, no, it's not. So I think that's a key lesson there is, when in doubt, ask. What are some of the, I guess, the guiding principles that you have to ensure that people do know that some of your, we hear this a lot in our industry, we're all leaders, right? Like, our values, our principles, but what are some of the things that you've had to apply explicitly because you have a remote office to ensure that some of that nuance isn't assumed? Who wants to open it up? Jim?
Yeah, sure. So assume good intent. I think that's first and foremost in all communication. There's so much context that gets missed when people are miles apart and talking over text. So always presume people mean the best thing, not the worst thing. Video, first and foremost. No meetings without video. People need to be able to see each other. 10% of what we say is actually verbal. The remaining 90% is all below the surface. So if you can't see the way someone is reacting to what you're saying, you're going to miss so much information. Don't wait to say something as well. Get on the phone right away. It's so easy to be able to wait till the next check-in a week later and let something fester. And both as a manager and as an IC, you can't let those things progress, because at some point it blows up the house burns down and everything else. We're big on mission, vision, values, that kind of thing. So we do a lot of that kind of monthly reiteration of our core values as a business. Could recite them ad infinitum, but it's one of those things that we stress, and we get managers to set those sorts of things with their teams and just constantly reiterate.
Anybody want to add on to that?
Yeah, I can. So on the values things, there's two things that we do that really help kind of institutionalize that. One is to hire based on those values and to do performance reviews based on those values. That kind of puts a common thread for all of this stuff, and people kind of make sure that those are actually important things and not just words on a proverbial wall. We don't have a wall, but you can imagine. The other thing for us is there's two key characteristics that we look for. For us, two core values that are really important. One are default actions, so we really want to find folks that are the type of people that can identify problems, break them down, and take action on them with a lot of autonomy. They don't need a lot of hand-holding. They can make smart decisions, and they can move projects forward without needing a lot of people to guide them. That doesn't mean you don't try and help provide structure, but that's kind of their tendency. The second thing is default to transparency. So if you want folks to default to action, you got to make sure to work really hard to give them all of the relevant information. Don't try and hide things. We put all of our numbers in front of folks. We put all of our communication in there. We don't hide problems. We try and put it all out there because if you want them to take action, you need your teams to know what the problems are. And so if you give them a lot of the information and you've hired these people that can take action on it, you've kind of equipped them a little bit to make sure that they're mostly making good choices. There's a lot of other things you need to do, but those are kind of two guiding principles for us.
Sorry, Dana, I missed one thing. I'm just curious, just from the audience, how many folks here either pair program or have teams that pair program?
That's a really good question. Raise a hand. How many people utilize pair programming?
So for us, we pair program basically on everything. So designers pair with product managers, with engineers, amongst themselves. So anytime anything's getting developed, even remotely, we've got two people in.
That's awesome. So Dave, what about you in your world? You're a little bit different, Mozilla or Firefox, old school, we love it. So what about y'all? How did you come to these value stances to make it successful?
A lot of it just comes from having started as an open source project, and so we're able to import a lot of the wisdom that just generally exists in that zeitgeist. And a lot of that involves just make sure you wrote something down. It is very important to have these meetings face to face and in person, but someone missed that meeting. They maybe weren't on that immediate team, or they were in the wrong time. And somebody missed that meeting. You don't want them to miss out on that information. So every meeting should have an artifact created that other people can learn from.
Yeah.
Record meetings.
Yeah, record meetings. At Envision, we just try to really hammer down, establishing a written culture, forcing people, don't get hung up and worry about the grammar, but really worry about the content. Once again, it comes to best intent, but don't assume anything, right? It's I'm going to assume that you don't know anything I'm saying, even though I probably told you 15 times, because people, especially this day and age with all of our distractions, we have the memory of a goldfish. So it's really important that you establish a written culture, and not, once again, one media type in many, because everybody learns a little bit different. And Envision being a design company, we really utilize design thinking for all of our problems. I run a platform team. We're basically back-end engineers and DevOps. They don't want me making front-end because I'll just throw buttons everywhere.
We do too.
I just put a button on it. Instead of a bird, it's a button. But we still follow the design thinking patterns because it's taking people through a journey. And when you apply that to process, you're going to have a tendency to write those stories out. And so I think it's a pretty interesting approach. And more companies are doing it. Just like Tim noted, is having pairing. And I think you have to be creative on how you pair remotely. And so that opens up a question. So Wade, in your org, and I'm going to kick it to you guys, I promise, in 2 seconds. And Wade, in your org, how do you do pair programming? How do you move from that ideology phase into actually getting to, defining the problem scope, understanding the requirements in a distributed place with team members?
We actually don't do a ton of pair programming at Zapier. There is some, but mostly folks, we try and spend a lot of time working up front is so the way our teams are structured is there's like typically a PM, a designer, and a handful of engineers, typically a mix of like front end, back end type folks. And those folks mostly kind of set their own, they own a piece of the product. So they have and then they have a charter around what they're trying to achieve around that. And then they set as a team what their kind of like roadmap and specs will look like. And so we try and get very clear up front, like, hey, this is the thing that we want to build, this is the thing, these are what the specs are going to look like. That way, it's as close to clarity up front as we can get, and then lots of just very quick check-ins. So check-in, every half day, or hey, here's what I did, here's what's going on, here's where I'm at. That way you have a chance to just kind of course correct as you go. If you're driving, you don't want to wait until you're like totally off the cliff to course correct. You kind of just want to be right here all the time. And so those quick check-ins pretty regularly help you make sure that you're kind of staying on that course.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm going to open this up to y'all because I'm sure you're going to have even more interesting questions than I'm going to be able to come up with this night. I haven't slept a lot either. Not as bad as Jason over here. One day, I'll live that dream. So besides getting people in person together, what are some other creative ways that you've built that connective tissue on a human level outside of just, hey, tell me the status and what are you working on? It's really easy, at least in my being 100% distributed, to only Slack when it's a transactional relationship. It's like, hey, you have this thing and I want it. But we all know that when you build empathy and have that social connectivity, that people care about each other and want to go the extra mile to help them. So how do you build empathy within your teams and really form that, having a distributed place? What are some creative ways y'all tackle this, Dave?
One of the first team I managed at Mozilla, the thing that worked just incredibly well there, every morning we had, for me it was morning, but it was the evening, we had a half-hour meeting with no agenda, no work talk was actually discouraged. It was just kind of like, let's spend a half hour and just say hi, and something will come up, and we'll talk about work when it comes up, but let's just see how things are going. That lasted for 2 or 3 years, and it ended up being one of the tightest knit teams I've ever done.
Yeah, right there. What about you, Tim? How do you get those engineers to talk about themselves instead of their projects?
Various creative ways of people getting drunk together remotely.
We do that too. We do remote happy hours, and I'm in Portland, and most of our people are in Western Europe, so it gives me a justification to day drink at 10 a.m. I'm like, I'm doing it for the team. It's for the team, but in all seriousness.
I mean, that's what we do.
There you go.
And as part of that, we do daily stand-ups, or most teams do daily stand-ups. They usually start earlier. Officially, they start at a specific time. Most people dial in 15, 20 minutes earlier, just to shoot the shit for me.
Yeah, awesome.
We have a lot of, rituals that kind of help build that bond and that camaraderie. Not everyone loves all of them. Most of them are pretty good. So a few of the things we do, we have this habit of doing Friday updates. So every Friday, folks post to their internal blog, here's what I did this week, here's what's going on next week. But early on, one of our engineers added this section called Unplugged. And it's usually like, here's a picture of me, with my family, or with my friends, or a puppy dog, or whatever. Here's what I did this weekend. And it took off like wildfire. So now pretty much everybody adds this kind of unplugged section. And when folks read these, you kind of get to know their teammates. So that's one. We do these pair buddy things every week. So we have a bot in Slack that randomly pairs you up with somebody else in the org. And you jump on like a 30-minute Zoom call and just talk about, not work stuff, just talk about hobbies, life, whatever. And that kind of helped build some bonds. And then there's been other things that's been more emergent. So one Friday afternoon, our support queue was getting pretty well taken care of, and so one of the folks on our support team was like, let's have a dance party. How do you do a dance party in remote team? They decided to pick a random song, and then you record a GIF of yourself and post it in the Slack channel. And so there's dozens of these GIFs of people just kind of like doing little fun motions and stuff. I'm not very good at it, but
that was pretty good though.
Okay.
Give yourself some credit.
Anyway, these types of things, like they're kind of cheesy, but they actually, you know, you kind of build these rituals, and they do build kind of those bonds, and helps you build those relationships. Kind of what Jason said, you know, that way when the house is on fire, like you actually kind of know each other and like are more willing to jump in and help each other out rather than like, who is this person and why should I care, sort of thing.
Okay, so I'm going to give y'all one more question. I'm going to open up to the floor. This can be a quick one. I want everyone to answer. So do you think that remote and distributed teams are going to last, or are we going to change this experiment and go back? What do you think? What is your prediction? Tell me your prediction on the future of product building. I'm gonna give it to you.
I feel like you're trying to get me to say something. No, yeah, the tools only get better. It only becomes easier. Yeah, it's of course going to keep going. Probably hopefully get stronger.
Yeah. What's your prediction?
Yeah, I'm gonna sit on the fence.
I'm
in between, right? I think there'll be more of it. I don't think it'll ever go fully distributed, 100%. I mean, there'll still be people working in offices together.
Yeah, I think it's a success. I think it'll become more and more common. People will still work in offices, but I think the tools get a lot better, and remote will get a lot easier. Yeah,
totally.
I'm an advocate.
I'm an advocate. I think that, you know, we're out here building these tools to connect us. We're going to utilize them. And the one thing that I find interesting in a division that is, when we talk about building remote teams, a lot of people are dipping their toes into this water because it's harder and harder to find engineers. It just and product managers and designers and people that want to move, and there's definitely no reason to. And so you have this sense, and I think Jason was talking about this, of like, I can only get talent in my backyard. But when you take that opportunity, you find that there's talented people in Missouri, but there's talented people in where I'm from, which is southeast New Mexico, Texas, you can't tell, that may have not had those opportunities, and now that we're opening those doors for the opportunities. But I think there will always be a blend, because having that FaceTime, you know, we aren't robots yet, is still really important. So I think it's going to be a while, but I see it as a future. So with that being said, we're going to open up some questions. And do we have any mics, or I'll just run around? Hold on. I get my steps in this way.
That's important for remote folks, is to get out of your house and move around some.
So I got a question for all of you. So how many time zone difference, how big a time zone difference is too big for a remote team?
Good question. Who wants to answer that? Dave?
Yeah, I think every time zone you're farther you are is like another difficulty level. They're all surmountable. It's hardest to surmount when people won't ever have overlap. Our biggest difficulty was our Taipei office, and we have a West Coast office, a Taipei office, and a European office. If those three areas were all on the same team, never worked out well. So enough time you can still have that human connection without making people work weird hours. Very easy to work with folks on the East Coast from here. Pretty easy to work with folks in either Europe or Taipei if you're a certain
West Coast.
Depends. Yeah, West Coast. Well, and a West Coaster who is willing to work a little later than some folks. 12 hours. Like the exact opposite of your day. It's killer. So I have a team in India, in Bangalore, and it's 12 and a half hours during the summer, 11 and a half hours during the winter. So you lose, right? You can barely find any time. I find no more than 3 or 4, if you can avoid it, is sort of where I find the best overlap with you. We try very hard to keep people in the same time for a core team.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Core teams should be like within this, get at least a couple hours a day of overlap. Depending on the function, time zone diversity is really helpful though. So for example, in our support org, you want that time zone diversity because you can create like 24/7 customer service for like infrastructure, DevOps, like super helpful. People don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to debug stuff. So like there's certain functions where having some of that time zone diversity is super helpful. But when you're talking about like core product units that need to ship things, like more time zone overlap there is typically useful.
Yeah, it can be tough. At Envision, we all have a standard where we follow Eastern hours, like we follow New York hours. I'm in Portland, so that means we get up really early. But we try to also just ensure that we have at least 3 hours of overlap, or 4 ideally. But it also comes back down to hiring. Set expectations out the gate. Like for our company, we're like, listen, we work these core hours. If you're in, I don't know, India's a good one. If you're in India, we don't want people working in the middle of the night. They're not going to do their best. Most people's circadian rhythms don't allow you to be awake at night. So then we think about how we're going to structure that team. And we put the autonomy back down to our managers that are forming those teams and have that responsibility. How are you going to make this work given your agenda? Right? Because I can sit there and say, listen, I want all your people that are globally remote to be on this, and I think that engineering is a creative job. You want people at their best, but then it also comes down to hiring adults that meet their commitments and giving them the freedom to work when they need to work, but ensuring that they know the responsibility to share information is on them. So we try to be pretty fluid. It's trial and error, I think we can all say that. It's still something that we're all probably continuously tweaking. Who's got a question out there? Easy.
I'm wondering about when you hire, do you look for people who are more experienced or just not junior? Because when you're distributed, how do you mentor? How do you learn? This is all collaborations. You're expecting everyone to kind of hold their own. What do you look for?
Great question.
We do tend to get a lot. Our applicant pool is pretty big. So as a result, we're able to hire more senior folks just more generally. Some roles we've hired folks who are earlier in their careers, but we tend not to hire like folks straight out of school. But that's more of a personal philosophy. I think you guys might have found ways to do it. We just haven't really done much with it because we haven't needed to.
What about you, Tim?
Oh, yeah. We typically ask less experienced people to at least spend a bit of time in the office. I was actually the first employee they asked to come into the office that lived remotely 10 years ago. And it works pretty well. Often we'll ask people to do like 1 or 2 years in a populated office to get oriented, get some mentorship. More experienced roles were more easy to work remote.
I don't think we've actually been particularly conscious in how we hire. And what I mean by that is the more junior folks we tend to find in cities, and they're in or near offices we have. So they end up working in person for some time, build some seniority, and then tend to go remote. Remote work applicants tend to be more senior for us.
We really decide it based upon the work. Because we want to be able to give back to the community, and we want to continue this experiment of having the ability to take people from other parts of the world that may not have an opportunity to work in this type of tech. But we're very explicit and intentional. So we do interns, and people are like, you are crazy hiring an intern that doesn't know anything in a remote company. I was like, I'm a little crazy, so we'll make it work. But we make sure that we give really task-driven work. And as an intern, they're going to work that way already. It's like, here, this is what you're going to do today. And then you really just have to amp up the check-ins when you have really junior workers and say, are you on track? Do you know what you need? But it comes back to finding that persona. And it's that personality type that is going to be okay asking questions. I think, at least for me, there's this fallacy in thinking. It's like, I'm going to work remote and work from home. I'm an introvert. This is my dream. I don't have to talk to anybody, ever. It is the exact opposite. You're going to talk to everybody all the time. And so trying to find, not extroverts, but that people that are humble. They're going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. And so we look for that personality trait of humility, and that they're comfortable saying, I'm going to reach out. And we do onboarding buddies. So we put the onus on the mentor to be like, hey, are you okay? Do you need help? Should we open a BIM? What are we working on? But it's hard. But we tend to gravitate towards people that have been in the industry a little bit longer, because you have to have a lot of autonomy. So yeah. Anybody else? Question? No, I got one. I saw you first. I'll give you minutes.
If you would judge the communication skills of your teams, Do you think that communication skills are better of your remote teams than of the on-site teams you have worked with in the past in comparison to be successful?
Anybody, Dave?
Yeah, I think the remote work in a lot of ways, like, it will amplify your problems. And if you have a communications problem, that will go bad quickly. And so it is important to really care about management, to do it right, to make sure people are working together. And anytime you're working to be better, you're going to be better. And so all of our teams are in some sense remote. I looked through my org chart before I came here, and there's not one team where everyone is in the same office. So I can't give you a lot of comparison, but I do think the most successful remote teams are the ones that have developed that communication skill, and that's really important.
Yep. All right, next question.
I've two questions unrelated. One's very quick though. As far as recruiting goes, I mean, when I think about our company, most of our domestic remotes are like friends or known entities or former colleagues of people, and internationally it's been done through a recruiting staffing agency. So I'm wondering, like, how do you go about tactically recruiting for like unknown quantities? Because I know most people search, you know, by like city, and if you are distributed, you don't have that sort of like node to like search off of. And the second question is, my company, we've leaned pretty heavily into remote dev. I'm a product manager, and I'm wondering if you have any advice for like non-devs basically to like break out of HQ and go remote.
Do it. No, I'm joking. Wade, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I'm sure we've done, I don't know if it will work for others. We're fortunate that we can hire from our user base. We have a really big user base, some of which is technical, and so that's a thing that we lean into. That may or may not work for others. We wrote a book on remote work that's somewhat popular. If you Google, like, you know, guide to remote work, it comes up first in search results and things like that. So that pulls in a lot of folks. There are a lot more job boards and things like that specialize in remote work, so you can do that. And that'll pull folks in. So I haven't found it difficult to get like applicants. In fact, we get, like, if we post a job up, within like a couple weeks we'll have had over like 1,000 applicants. Our challenge is more sifting through that than it is attracting people. Yeah, and then what was the second? Oh, non-engineers going remote. I don't know that I have a lot of advice for that. I mean, we just, everything is remote for us, and so that's how we do it. Yeah, I don't really have.
Tim, what about you? You got a huge org. What about your non-engineering, participants in your product lifecycle? How do you convince them to do this?
Yeah, so we've actually got a fair few remote product managers, funnily enough. So they kind of do similar things to engineering managers, right? They're constantly talking about the strategy for the product. They're in with the teams. They're in every meeting, doing a lot of video, a lot of that tactical stuff. They pair program, if you will, on any sort of challenging problem. How you're going to implement this feature or whatever. They'll jump in there. They'll use the same tools as the devs. Some of them that are a bit more technically inclined will even run a local version of the app, just to build that empathy with the engineering teams, just so they know how to run it and they can play with it locally. And that forces them to interact with engineers a lot more, right, and understand the technical things, but your mileage might vary.
Yeah, I think for Envision, we really, brand awareness, like, we're pretty well known, but we've made a movie. We do that, designers and all. We do little remote, like meetups in central locations. So for instance, in Toronto, we have some leaders there. So we had a hiring event in Toronto. It's like, why not? We have people there. And so we try to do these little hubs of like, hey, we're gonna do a hiring event. We'll host meetups. We'll get out there and hit every channel available. It's not much different, to be honest, than like how people that aren't remote recruit. But I think just really having some brand awareness. You gotta self-promote. You gotta tell everybody your shit's the best. And convince other people so they start talking about it and go, oh my gosh, I want to work here. So we blog a lot. People always ask me, is Clark from Envision real? I said, yeah, he's real. Seriously, he's real. But if y'all aren't familiar with the tool, we send a lot of emails. There's a lot. All right, we have time for a few more questions. I'm going to try to go to the back. Oh my gosh, I saw you first back here. When you work from home, you never walk. You just stand in the same place for 12 hours, so it's good for me.
Thank you. How do you folks deal with payroll and work authorization issues globally?
Good question. Wade, how do you do that? You're 100% distributed.
You will need a lawyer that is good.
Lawyers are important.
You will need accountants that are also good. I would start there. This topic we could talk about this one for a while. I don't know that I can make this more succinct than lawyer and an accountant.
Oh yeah, it's way worse than that.
Yeah,
It's hard, y'all.
The compliance challenges are probably one of the toughest things. Now,
They're why I'm on a first name basis with our lawyers.
yeah. So I don't know that that's I don't know that that's like something an engineering leader and engineering manager should. That's something like the folks at the very top of the org should be sorting out. You have a good HR team that's like working on this stuff all the time.
Jason.
So we just went through diligence on this one. And this gets really gnarly in a lot of different ways because think about like Germany, France. Okay, some places you have to have contractors. Options are an issue overseas or in other countries. Local currency. There's a lot of different issues here. So I say if you're going to start distributed, stay in the same country. Then move to one other country. I'm a big fan of North America to start, and then you start figuring out if other things are going to go that way because this gets really hairy really quickly. So at Canonical, which is the extreme example I think of this for us, every single person who was not a UK resident was a contractor, technically a contractor to get around this issue. And that's another way to do that, but it's kind of it's fake.
Hey, what about you?
It is. So we have people everywhere. That was a historical artifact of how we hired from our community. We did the independent contractor thing for a while. That had its own set of problems. I love our employees in these different countries. They're great. It is a big burden, and the work is to understand all that compliance. It's a burden. I wouldn't start there if you can avoid it.
So lesson learned, hire a team to do that for you because you don't want to do that.
Yeah, and absolutely get good lawyers.
One tip that might be useful, if you are hiring folks in places that, different places that use different currencies, try and pay them in that currency. So like we absorb the, fluctuations in currency. That way they get a steady paycheck. So that's a tip that's useful.
Yep, Tim, what do you got?
And there are companies that solve these global payroll
They do it
problems.
for you.
They just take care of it. They're not great. The UX is horrific, but they will solve the problem. So
Use TriNet or what's the other ones? JustWorks or
IIPay is another one.
Yeah, these are PEOs is the keyword you're looking for in the US, like to hire people in different states. Because even hiring folks in different states is complicated as well. Generate nexuses and sales tax and
it's a ball of worms, and I think you get creative, and that's why you have a really good legal team to help you solve some of those, because you don't want to be blocked on great talent because of local laws, but I'm going to tell you sometimes you are. Sometimes you just are. All right, we got some more questions. I'm in the back. I saw you first.
Hi, I'm curious how you kind of follow up on that, how you handle salaries. So like, do you have a strategy where, you pay to local market, you pay one structure across the world, across the country? What are your thoughts there?
Good question. I got an answer for this too, but you guys?
I think this is largely philosophical. There's basically, it's kind of a personal choice. There's two schools of thought. One is you pay the same rate because the same talent should get paid the same amount anywhere. And then the other school of thought is you pay based on market rates and you just comp locally. I think you kind of have to make a choice and you pick that lane and that's the lane you go in. We tend to follow the former, so we think the same role is deserving of the same rates. We tend to pay the same stuff everywhere. Now again, it gets a little complicated when you go internationally and you're dealing with currency fluctuations, all that stuff. But we philosophically try, and that's our approach.
So we're a little blended. I'll give you how we do it. It's not perfect. I am a hardcore believer of pay bands. Having an international team, it's really surprising how good some engineers can advocate for their skills, and they're doing the exact same job as somebody else. When you add in the language barrier or the culture of those particular engineers, they're not going to negotiate. They're going to be like, hell yeah, I got the coolest job ever, pay me whatever. And then you have this disparity because you have a really good, sorry to hit on you white guys, white dudes in San Francisco that have played this game compared to a really, humble Argentinian that's just like, oh my gosh, I have opportunity. So we're really hardcore about creating equal pay no matter what and having bands, but we also have another variable, which is, we divide the world in location. So you're paid based upon that rate, that location at market rate. So it's still within the band. So it's a way to blend pay equality, but also take in consideration cost of living at places and make it fair, especially when you want to do the right thing. And I think most of us really do want to do the right thing. What about you, Tim?
So it comes down to whether we're hiring for a local office or for a remote role. So if it's local office, we tend to pay local market rate. If it's a remote role, we try to look for a regional average, right? So West Coast, East Coast, or generally, say, Australia or wherever it happens to be. So it'll come down for what we're hiring for. Philosophically, I think, me personally, I'd love to pay the same person who does the same job, the same amount, irrespective of where they live. I think practically speaking, trying to hire someone in San Francisco for the US average salary of a software engineer, it's never going to happen. So.
Sure. All right, we got time for a couple more questions. You already asked some questions. I'm going to give it to you because I saw you first.
Thank you. Well, I asked the question for the previous speaker. So, sorry about being back on hiring. When you interview people for remote positions, what specifically do you interview for, and how do you interview for it when you hire remote folks?
Do you mean like the actual cadence of the interview, or what you look for as in that person, in that job?
What you look for in remote.
Okay. So the question is, what do you look for when you're in somebody to join your team when they're remote? Dave, what do you got?
Communication skills. We look for that for everybody. It's important, but it is particularly important for remote. We'd like to know if, we use the interview process to help understand if they've done it before and if they're going to need mentoring and coaching there, but for the most part, it's if they have the communication skills.
Yep. Do you have a question? No? That's okay.
Take a step back from the tactics. Just want to really go back to the fundamental of having distributed teams. One thing that Jason mentioned is trust. And I think it might come pretty natural for the companies that founded as distributed teams, but there are companies who introduce distributed team later in their stage. And in that scenario, how do you, what are some really good ideas or things that you have had that would be able to facilitate or to create a trust between the teams?
Tim, you want to give that a shot?
Sure. So we make expectations very clear. So we write things down, we make sure that everybody understands what's expected of them if they're remote. So when we first did this, we essentially had a remote work chart, right? Here are the things that we expect of you, and here's our commitment back to you in this situation. You can find a ton of this kind of charter online. We actually were heavily inspired by the Fog Bugs remote work policy. We probably frankly copied it, right? I mean, let's not pretend otherwise. So that's one. Secondly, I think in the engineering world, the output that teams have is a bit more objectively measurable, right? Features get shipped, there's product working. So it's easier to measure what someone is working on without having to be on top of them. So if you have the processes in place, you ship software frequently, you've got good metrics around how you're tracking, you can take the productivity questions around trust off the table because it's just there, it's visible to everyone. So then it comes down to how people work together. We have a thing that if two people aren't working together, that's all if they can't work together well, that's all they do. They just work together, right? Until they learn how to work together well. So it'll depend on teams, but from a big picture level, take any of the things that could create a lack of trust, automate them in process, make it visible and transparent to everyone, and be super explicit in your expectations.
So we got time for about 2 more questions.
When you are forming a team for a particular targeted outcome, one of the criteria you mentioned was time zone difference. So do you also put in a criteria of co-location? So this particular team is co-located in the same office, especially if there is a partially located office and someone who is remote. You also add that criteria. And once you start doing that, you have people who are unhappy because they're not able to get to work on a certain other area of the product. They're always stuck in this particular component.
Dave, can you give us an answer there?
Yeah, when we're building a team from scratch, and there's not an existing open source community that we have to take into account or anything, typically we try and say a team has to have one home base. It has to have a home base. And if you're going to come to an office, you have to come to that one to be on that team. That doesn't mean if you can still be remote, but we don't want 2 sub-teams forming locally. It's hard enough to balance one local team with a remote team, so we try very hard to avoid 2 sub-teams that should be active.
Awesome. So we have one more question, but I think we'll all be around for a bit.
Absolutely.
Are we around? All right. Final question.
Hi. Yeah, you talked quite a lot about getting on video and using Slack, but I was curious about any tools or techniques you'd recommend for more design work and brainstorming, whiteboarding, that kind of thing.
Not to pander, Envision is really
Envision? I mean, there's not a better tool out there. At least as far as I know.
Our designers agree.
I'm going to say this one thing, and I'm not pitching our company, but we in engineering, no, seriously, we in engineering. Insert pitch here. We in engineering, we don't use our tool like the designers do, but we actually use it. We have this tool called Freehand, which is a huge digital whiteboard. And when I started using it to do database and data modeling, the designers were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm writing a transaction." And they're like, "That's crazy. We use it for specs and because it is a collaborative field. We use our own tool, but there's a whole bunch of other mechanisms out there." What do y'all use besides the wonderful Envision tool that everybody loves?
Our design team uses Mural a lot as well.
It's not as good, but I've heard it's all right.
I mean, they primarily do use Envision, but Mural I use for something else. I'm trying to think what else they use. Yeah, I can't. I mean, screen share on Zoom.
Envision.
Yeah, Envision really is the dominant tool.
I didn't pay them. I promise. What about you, Dave? You come from an open source. I don't know if it's rain and money, but what tool sets do y'all use?
So tools we use, it's Slack and IRC. A lot of wikis, which have the pluses and minuses. Bugzilla, don't recommend it. GitHub, I do. Envision, I'm going to repeat it because I mentioned that I was going to do this to our head of design, and he asked me to pass that on. And a lot of Google Docs.
A lot of Google.
Yeah, a lot.
We're heavy Dropbox users too. Very heavy Dropbox users. What about you, Tim?
I mean, you think collaboration tools, Trello, Jira, all of that kind of stuff. A lot of Google Docs. There was a service. I don't know how many folks here are familiar with Screen Hero. Did anyone use it?
Oh yeah, Screenplay.
Absolutely loved it. They were acquired by Slack. Not so great anymore. That was probably the best remote pairing tool, the best screen sharing, the best collaboration tool, frankly, that ever existed. Integrating into Slack, they've experienced some technical challenges. I hope it'll come back.
So I'm gonna give a shout out back. We really use Zapier a lot too. Being remote, we have so much integrated with Wade's tool. I'm a junkie on it. We use that bot for a lot of things, pulling stuff, posting messages, and really keeping us connected outside of our own awesome Envision tool. But with that being said, I'm gonna quit pimping my stuff. I really didn't mean to. So thank you all for participating. I want to thank my fellow panelists. And one last thing, are you hiring?
Yes, yes we are.
Are you hiring?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yes, we are. So not that you should leave what you're doing, but you never know. All right, thank you all.